Because like I said, I don't even remember. I remember when Columbine happened, but I don't remember like the day. I don't remember what was going on. I don't remember what happened afterwards. It was just like, wow, another shooting, and it wasn't close to us. And so we just kind of like put it out of our heads. And I feel like that's how our generation has been all the time anyway. It's like, what's hot for the 5 seconds and then it's gone. It's out of our minds until it happens again.
I think the irresponsible part of the media is that we kind of lump everything into mental health. And that's kind of the buzzword in psychology, school psychology, it's all mental health. Well, there's mental health, which is legitimate, underlying difficulty, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, whatever you want to call it. But then there's also just poor behavior.
So I've heard relationship come up as a trend, and even on our first episode, I talked about in the community how Ricky recommended me for a scholarship, and you're talking about how we immerse ourselves in these communities and we connect to this network and this system that's in place. So I think Parnell also brought up an interesting point about how the disparities and how children in lower communities have to go to school with metal detectors and all these other devices or preventative measures available to them. So my question now is this a mental health issue if we have schools that don't have these type of resources or systems in place, and these other school shootings are happening in places where these things aren't there? So is it mental health or is it something different?
Go ahead.
I wouldn't venture to say mental health flat out, because if just going back, and this might be a stretch, but I don't think it is. Just going back to America, America was kind of built, and the foundation was kind of built on violence. We took it from someone else. There was carnage, there was murder, there was all these different things that, we came and we kind of laid the foundation for bearing arms and just taking what we thought was ours and things like that. So when we talk about kids coming into schools and shootings, or we talk about black kids killing black kids, I don't necessarily think it's because of the access to the guns. I don't necessarily think it's because of, black kids have so much hatred towards their own selves. I just think that violence has been as American to America as, the daggone Dallas Cowboys are to America's team. You know what I'm saying?
It's a bad correlation.
We've been, that's America's team. And America was kind of built on violence, starting out. So it's no wonder. So I wouldn't say, because these kids are poor and they don't have any resources that they're going to be shooting up everyone. I don't say because all these white kids are coming in shooting up these kids in these schools, it's because they have mental illness. I think we have to look at the larger theme, which is, America and how we kind of built ourselves up. We think about NRA, all these different guns, all these different issues, but we still would not say, hey, we're not going to have any more high-power weapons. No, we still want these weapons, because why? It's bringing in money. It's all these different things. The president's for it. How do you have I never thought that you would see an elementary school full of predominantly white kids be slaughtered as a Sandy Hook, and there not be any outcry about, we have to get rid of these weapons. You see what I'm saying?
Probably was, though. I think with each one, there's been like different types of responses. I can't say for sure what it was. I don't know if there were like people writing, or if there were people advocating or trying to get some type of legislation passed. I just feel like now, because it's more student-led, and given the climate right now in the country, it is getting a lot of attention. I think it's great that it's getting the attention that it's getting now, because it is, like you said, we need to have that change, and we should have been had it 20 years ago with Columbine. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that we're even still having these conversations 20 years later, and people can still have access to some of these weapons, whether it be for schools or just in the community, is a problem. But now it seems like it's picking up steam and it's getting the attention that it needs. And hopefully we get some type of legislation out of it that changes these things. But I don't know if it's safe to say that there wasn't any outcries then. Because like I said, I don't even remember. I remember when Columbine happened, but I don't remember like the day. I don't remember what was going on. I don't remember what happened afterwards. It was just like, wow, another shooting, and it wasn't close to us. And so we just kind of like put it out of our heads. And I feel like that's how our generation has been all the time anyway. It's like, what's hot for the 5 seconds and then it's gone. It's out of our minds until it happens again. So it's just a perpetual cycle. So now even some of the ones that you named, I didn't even know of. The two after Columbine was Paducah, Jonesboro. So I've never even if I heard about it when it happened, it's just out of my mind. So I think that speaks to a level of like how we become so desensitized to these things that are occurring, and how we have like, it's just like something that we expect. We just, okay, there's another shooting. Dag, that's harsh. What can we do? How can we help for the moment? But then we're off back onto our lives, and then it happens again. So this time I'm actually glad that there are people like kids that are coming out of schools, teachers that are standing with them, communities that's advocating and kind of like standing around them, kind of what you were saying, like having that pulse with the kids and actually supporting them to kind of lead this charge, because we do need those changes to happen. We need them.
But I guess what I was trying to say is that how often do we say, man, if there was a bunch of white kids, I bet things would be different. You know what I'm saying? If it was somebody white that was doing, you know what I'm saying? Even with the police shootings, if Trayvon was white, I bet he would have been charged. Now they're saying that if it was a bunch of white kids that was getting killed in schools, I bet they would be doing something to address it. But they're not.
But this is the thing, though. I'm having like mind. Y'all brought up so many different points, and I think for me, I always try to infuse culture into it. Like the question you just posed, like, okay, what if it was a bunch of white kids? So if we look at Black Lives Matter and the movement we have going on right now with these white youth that are leading the charge and trying to get the government to put some type of policy in place for this. If we kind of link violence, how you said America is like built on violence. The undertone of America is violence, right? Stay with me. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at what Black Lives Matter have been like pushing for, like I know the message has been construed a little bit, but they've been pushing for rights, change. When it comes to being like shot, black men being shot just unjustly. Now, if you look at how we regulate guns and who is able to get guns, have access to guns, and safety as a whole, like as Americans, how we feel safe walking down the street, now is how we feel safe going into schools. Safety is the issue. Safety opposed to being shot, opposed to being stabbed, but safety and violence. So bringing it all together, all these different movements, we have black people leading the charge for this. Now we have white students leading the charge for this. Now what is going to happen?
I think that's an important question, too. And as you said, there are so many things that have come up within this conversation, and I think you bring up another interesting point, that how violence is embedded in the culture and the fabric of America. And so when we start looking at all these isolated incidents of school shootings, Columbine happened in an era before social media. So, there was an outcry. People were upset, but then we don't jump to, oh, we need gun reform. Like, some people may have, but like it didn't pick up still.
We didn't because we didn't have that instant access to see that these people are,
But really what it comes down to, and I think it goes back to the question that I asked about, are these things happening in our community? And I think you guys did a wonderful job of addressing, like, yes, violence happens within every community and within every environment, but the narrative of the school shooter, the profile where we see on mass media is that, oh, this is a mental health issue. He was distraught. He was suffering. He was lonely. And so they paint this profile and they tell us that this is a mental health issue that's isolated and separate from gun reform. Now kids are speaking out. Well, and mental health, it is part and parcel, right? Like it has something to do with it. There's a component of that, and we have to address that. But there's mental health concerns within every community. So,
but I think the irresponsible part of the media is that we kind of lump everything into mental health. And that's kind of the buzzword in psychology, school psychology, it's all mental health. Well, there's mental health, which is legitimate, underlying difficulty, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, whatever you want to call it. But then there's also just poor behavior, which is not a mental health concern. I know back in Columbine, the idea or the assumption was these kids are, low self-esteem, neglected, outcasts, and, like, woe is me kind of thing. And that really wasn't true. A lot of these kids were actually angry narcissists. Like, how dare you exclude me from your group? Don't you see how great I am? And that sense of confidence, you go into a school and shoot 14, 15, 20 kids. So I think the media can be very misleading as far as what we kind of view as mental health, as a legitimate, concern that needs to be treated versus other factors, again, the gun reform, the policy, the access to weapons, those things I think deserve as much elevation as the mental health difficulties.
I think you bring up a great point in terms of like the systemic piece of it, like in terms of how we as a system need to address these issues. It's not just reforms at the school level or multicultural competences. The media, like when we embody and replace these type of thoughts and ideas in the minds of the larger community, they're going to get a certain understanding, and that's how they kind of operate. Because even me, I was thinking, like when they paint the profiles of these students, one of the suggestions for how we can kind of like alleviate some of this going on is like, oh, we should be nicer to the school bullying. And they're using that as one of the preventative measures that we like to use. So do you think that that's important? Like, should children just be nicer to each other? Do you think that it helps some? Or is it because of these extreme things you pointed out, narcissism and anger and rage?
Well, I think there was a preacher in New York that always says it's nice to be nice. I think being nice is never going to be a bad thing. But I think, again, like mental health, I think bullying is one of those words that's kind of thrown around loosely, and there are different ideas about bullying. So from a more research-informed perspective, it's aggression, it's repetition, and there's power imbalance. So a lot of what we see is, as far as kids being, fighting or scuffles, is that bullying or just, again, poor behavior between two kids in 5th grade, two kids in 8th grade, 9th grade, whatever the case is. So I do think, going back to the school climate, if there are anti-bullying measures in place, so anti-bullying policies where kids feel more connected, that's certainly going to be a great thing. Is that going to stop all of it? Probably not, but certainly a step in the right direction to really, get kids to be more, again, socially connected to their school community.
Okay. I think you bring up another very important point, too, because the research suggests that, black children are being suspended and they have a higher rate of discipline in school. And we talk about rage, anger, and violence, How do we connect that to what's going on with the mass shooters that feel like they're angry and the profile that you just laid out? Is there a connection between the two?
Yeah, there is. And that gets into, again, schools or school systems, their policies, practices around discipline, how we respond. So the kid who's fighting or the kid who's doing whatever, does that child need to be suspended, expelled, or do they need, more support? Do they need counseling? Do they need, more, help to engage in more pro-social behavior? Now, the easy fix is get the kid out 10 days, 5 days, but you've never addressed the root of the problem, and then it comes back. So again, as psychologists, we talk about, the function of behavior being, escape, avoidance. We actually played into that by sending the kid home for 5 days on vacation.
Right.
Then they come back having not learned anything.
A little remediation, and then
Reset.
Right
I'm about
back.
to go home again.
Exactly. So I think until we get to different ways of responding, I think psychologists do a great job at identifying problems, assessing, here's the issue. It's depression, it's SLD, it's whatever. But that second part is treatment of students' difficulty. And that, I think, is a good opportunity for us now to really get to, well, what should we do in response besides suspension, besides expulsion?
And for me, you brought up a good point, too. It's like, you said black kids are suspended more, like research shows that, than their white counterpart. And I think that we need to realize age-appropriate behavior. So if you have, I don't know the statistics, so I'm not gonna throw out numbers, but if you have middle schoolers who are getting suspended for 10 plus days, okay, over time, if you suspended 10 plus days, let's see, 3 or 4 times a year, look how much like instruction you've missed. So the amount of instruction you miss and you look at your grades, they kind of, correlate a little bit. So if you look at that and you had teachers who understood that at this age, students really act out. These boys, they're a little bit active around 9, 10 years old. So maybe I shouldn't suspend them. Maybe I shouldn't write them up and send them to the office. Maybe I should, turn my classroom around and manage their behavior a little bit better. So as school psychologists, we do that. So before we move on, can y'all speak to that?
Go ahead, sir.
Well, I was agreeing with you. I wasn't gonna speak on that piece, but I do think it's important to kind of talk about the need for school staff to have that classroom management training to be able to understand development over time. I know that specifically in even certain psychology programs, whatever your discipline, there are people who don't spend enough focus on development or age-appropriate behaviors. And so to see that we as a field aren't doing a good enough job at covering some of those things, it's understandable why maybe some of the educational fields may not. I don't know for sure, but I think the other piece that kind of exacerbates that issue is that when you have these classes in these schools, going more to the systems piece, where teachers have 35 students in a 3rd grade classroom, and maybe they're a little bit more frustrated because they don't have the skills to manage all the personalities, all the things in there, that's going on in their classroom. Maybe that does speak to some of those, okay, I'm just getting you out. Like I got at least 5 days without this kid, so now I can kind of worry about the other 34. So it is a lot of things systemically that I think these issues kind of speak to all the way around. Just there are so many different pockets that we could even do just a little bit of work in that could possibly make a change and save a life. But because the system is not getting as much dedication and funding and attention that it should, i.e. we just saw Betsy DeVos, kind of fumble her way through a conversation. She's charged with kind of leading this, and the people at the highest levels aren't even doing what they're supposed to do to even understand what's going on in schools in their own area. So it kind of makes sense how all this stuff is just kind of like trickling down, and it's just this ripple effect all the way around. So I think it does speak to just that need for that systems approach, that system, intervention, just to kind of help with all of these things. Like you said, it may not get rid of all of it, but at the very least, we're trying some way to kind of address all of these issues. And I think that involves getting all the stakeholders involved, right? So it can't just always be this top-down approach. We learned about systems and organizational change. It needs to be having those people on the front lines actually giving you that information. It needs to be some of those needs assessments completed for us to kind of see what is it that we need either in this specific district, in this specific school, in this specific state that we can implement right away.